You're listening to another episode of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
All right. I need to wake up. That's why I have coffee here, guys. Anyway, I have Matthew Lucci here, candidate for District 25. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things, particularly about Ukraine and Israel, because last night the Senate passed a vote that is apparently not going to make it in the House, even for a vote. I'm going to ask about that and about the whole situation with Israel and Ukraine. We talked about this the last time you were here, so there's been some developments. Also, we're going to talk about the abortion issue, about the proposed nationwide limitation on abortion at 15 weeks. And his position on that, because as I look at it now, you have on your wrist, right? Mm-hmm. What does it say?
It says pro-life.
Pro-life, right. So I didn't bring it up last time, but at the end of the show, I said, wait a minute, that must be a topic that's very important to him. And also, what else are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about taxes. I'm talking about the deficit and debt, and also the relationship between representing a district and also being a loyal member of the Republican leadership party and all this other business. So lots of stuff. So you been all right?
I've been doing well. And again, Brad, thanks for having me back on.
No problem. How is the campaign coming?
Campaign's been going very well. We've been having events all over the district. I think yesterday we had our 94th public event since I announced that I was 94. Running.
Wow.
The incumbent's had two since he announced that he was running again.
Well, like we talked about last time, it is an uphill fight against an incumbent, and it's obvious you're putting a lot of energy into this. And we'll talk about it at the end of the show where you think it's heading and what your prognostication is, because early voting starts not Monday.
It starts Tuesday of next week. A week from today, folks can go out to the polls and they can vote early.
Well, I got schooled. I thought it was the 19th. It's the 20th, you're saying?
It's the 20th.
Okay, I thought it was the 19th for some reason. But anyway, so yeah, and in Texas, we vote early a lot. I teach this in my classes that Texas probably takes advantage of this more than most. And I prefer to vote on election day or primary day because it's a very American thing to do. But my wife's work schedule doesn't really make it convenient. And so we do it early when she has a day off and that kind of thing. But anyway, let's go into the sponsors real quick, and then we'll jump right into all the fun games. Our place, restaurant, Otto, hope you're doing well. I'll be seeing you Thursday. Or Ryan, I guess Ryan runs the show. Otto just walks around as the maitre d' and celebrity. But our place is a great place to go and get yourself a chicken fried steak or get yourself pancakes or whatnot and pie and all the above. And so it's a really good thing. Also, thank you to Wild Cigar. It's another place to go and have some conversation, have a cigar, have a decent drink, watch the ball game. But if it's on, it's not like I stress that it's not a sports bar. It's there if you want it. But most people, when I've gone in there, particularly in the afternoon, they're either working or having like a meeting or something like that. It's really pretty nice. Also, thank you to Tiffany Nico. She'll be on the show March 5th, I believe. Yeah, she is on primary day. Yeah, and she's doing the St. Patrick's Day pub crawl on the 16th of March, and we'll be talking about that. Also, her new magazine's been out for a little while now, and we'll be talking about those things as well. Also, thank you to Southern Gem. They're open right now, found jewelry and gemstones. Last week, Gayla had her bourbon and bling thing, and that was really fun, because it was, a nice, decent little sip, and, all the jewelry and, all sorts of things you can do there. You had to take Mrs. Lucci there.
I should.
You should, yeah. Yeah, but it's, and there's everything in your price range, all the price ranges. She showed me a couple pieces like, wow, that's, somebody has a wallet to get that. But then she showed me several other things that much more within a reasonable budget. So she got the whole thing going on. Thank you also to two maids, Brenda Ramirez. I'll have her on next week on Tuesday. Brenda is part of my BNI group, and she just moved here from Kansas City, so she's pretty excited about things. She's big fan and all that. She has a really interesting business because they clean a lot of residential and commercial spots. They clean the Windmiller building, for example. But also you pay them by the quality of the job. You rate their job, and then you pay them, and then so it's not like a per hourly rate or per job rate and whatnot. So the rating is what does it. And so several BNI people use them, and they're just rave about the quality of service they get. So 817-764-0733 or twomatescleaning.com/Burleson if you want to get into that. Also, Pro Roofing, John Williams, 817-734-2756 here in Burleson. Home folks, you want to support the home folks because you know where they are when they have a roofing need or emergency, and they'll come out and give you the straight dope on what's going on with your roof. No upsell, no doomsday prognostications or anything like that. That's what always gets me. When I always take my car in or take my computer in, whatever, I've never seen anything like this before. And like, it's the first time in their 30-year career they've ever seen something like, but you're not going to get that with John. Also, Camco with Candy and Sammy. They've been doing this for about 20 years. Sammy is at 817-778-4592. Candy's at 817-925-2661. They'll help you with the rates. They'll help you with the mortgages. They'll help you with refinancing. They'll help you with whatever you really need. I've used them twice over the last 20 years to use money for repairs and school funding, whatever else. And I guess after today's inflation report, then we're going to hear all this hair pulling about rates again.
Well, you certainly will.
Yeah, I don't think that was the news Mr. Biden wanted to hear today. Of course, you have to wake him up first. But anyway, that's a cheap shot, but that's fine. Okay, where do we begin? Let's talk with the vote last night in the Senate, where you had, it was, I believe, 79 votes in favor. So obviously you had about, 29 Republicans vote in favor of the Ukrainian and Israeli aid package. It's already, Speaker Johnson has said it's dead on arrival. Which is within his power. I mean, people who want to rant and say he's, being dictatorial, well, that's always been the power of the speaker, is to determine what legislation is to be looked at. Would you, if you were sitting in that house, would you like to have had a chance to vote and or discuss that bill?
I would certainly like the chance as a representative to look at the bill, review the bill, and have a publicly recorded vote. I would vote no. And I'm sure we can go into that in a little bit.
I was going to ask you about that in a minute.
But I am much more in favor of getting things like this onto the House floor for debate and discussion rather than completely shutting it down.
Well, almost always, if the speaker doesn't think he has the votes or she has the votes in certain cases, they won't bring it to the floor. I don't know if Mr. Johnson already knows the vote count. I don't know if his whips have already put together the count as to what they would do about this bill or not, but it just seemed like he dismissed it out of hand and said, we're not going to vote on it. I would have liked to have had a chance. Now, I think if you and I were both members of Congress, our votes may have canceled each other out, and you said you'd vote against it.
Yes, I would.
And why is that?
I think the biggest thing is that we should not be supporting countries in their endless wars on the other side of the world. Now, you will make the argument that it is in America's best interest and strategic interest to do so, to support Ukraine so we can fight back against Putin. And I would counter, and I would say if it was that important, we would have had an agreement to do this before this war happened. I mean, Russia invaded Crimea, back in 2014, and they had tried to invade multiple times before then, and we had no such treaty with Ukraine before this war. If it was that important that we would have to empty our coffers and empty our munitions to send to Ukraine in the case that this happened, we would have already had a treaty in place with them decades ago to do this, but we did not.
Well, you talk about decades ago. Ukrainian government really was nothing more than just organized mafia until about 2014. And it's so having them involved in NATO or the EU would have been very problematic, to say the least. And then things changed in 2014 when they had this revolution, as they call it. And also, you had new leadership. And yes, Ukraine has a history of corruption in government, which makes them pretty much par for the course in Eastern and Central Europe. My point would be would we be better served helping the Ukrainians fight Russians in Ukraine than having us fight Russians in Lithuania or Latvia? Because you mentioned if it's that important, we'd have a treaty with them, right? Well, we do have a treaty with Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And my concern is that Mr. Putin isn't going to stop with Eastern Ukraine. He looks at Eastern Ukraine, or the entirety of Ukraine, as stolen Russian property, and he looks at the Baltic states in the same way. So what if Mr. Putin goes into Lithuania?
Well, because we have that treaty, that mutual defense treaty with Lithuania, for example. Putin knows we would be called in there. We would be obligated to defend them, even with our military force. Whereas Ukraine, there is not that barrier, or was not that barrier to Putin coming in. If it was that important to us that we stop Putin before he comes into Ukraine, then any time from 2014 all the way up until 2 years ago, we could have worked out a treaty for mutual defense. We could have worked out a treaty to sell them munitions. We could have worked out a treaty to send them money to buy munitions. We did not do that in that, 8-year period. And we had every opportunity to do so.
Well, the response I heard to that point is that some people thought that, you just don't enter a treaty overnight, and even if we began the process of joining Ukraine with NATO, that would be a trigger for what's happening now.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that they should have been a part of NATO. In fact, I don't think they should be a part of NATO.
But there's other people, both sides, both parties, that think that they should not, because they saw it as a provocative event. But then you have Mr. Trump last week saying, well, if these countries don't pony up, then he would tell Putin to do whatever the hell he wants, which is a quote. And so basically what Mr. Trump said last week is, if they don't do as we want, we're not going to honor our treaty obligations. Is that a statement that you can support?
That's not a statement that I support.
Okay.
I do support, and I've said this on this show before, renegotiating our NATO alliance. I do support renegotiating our alliances pretty much everywhere in the world, because the world is changing, and we have to make sure that our foreign policy is emblematic of an America First foreign policy. It's in our best interests first. And if it also serves the interests of other countries along the way, so be it. But this is the United States of America. Our president has an obligation to our people, not to the people of Ukraine, not to the people of Taiwan or anywhere else. And we can argue back and forth about what the specific terms of a treaty with Taiwan needs to be. And I'm in favor of having a treaty with Taiwan. I'm in favor of having a treaty with Israel. I'm in favor of honoring the treaties that we have around the world as they're written, and then reevaluating as they come up for renewal, to reevaluate what those terms need to be more in America's interest in the modern world, rather than the way the world was even a decade ago. Things have changed a lot since 2014.
Well, the thing about it is Mr. Trump's statement makes it sound, it's very, very arbitrary, and it's all dependent upon his mood that day or whatever, if he was going to be president at the time or will be president again, that if he thinks it's in America's best interest, then we'll do what we say. But if it's not in our best interest, then the treaty doesn't mean anything. And we've always criticized Russians and their predecessors, the Soviets, for treating treaties the same way. I agree that I believe this will happen sooner or later. The Baltic states will be under pressure, and they will be either forced to capitulate or they'll be invaded, and we're going to have to make a stand with them. Now, here's the thing that sometimes bothers me about Mr. Trump. He'll take something that really, is an issue about not all the NATO countries are paying their way, and that was the whole catalyst for that statement. Right? Is that too many countries are loafing on their deal, and I believe that to be true. And when he was president, I did give him credit for making the NATO countries pay more of their fair share, but he phrases it in such a way that it makes it controversial. I don't think any American would say, we should let these European countries have a free ride. But he phrases it in such a way that it makes it controversial. And that's one of my problems with Mr. Trump, is that you had a right point, but you made it poorly, because we have a treaty with these guys. We have a treaty with Poland. And it doesn't matter what they do to the point where, we're just going to walk away from our obligations. I do believe these countries need to pay more for NATO. And I think one of the interesting side effects of the Ukrainian invasion is, I think the Europeans are acting more as a European group without having to be led by the nose by Americans, drugging their kicking and screaming. But we had those treaties.
Yeah.
And I'd rather support Ukraine there than potentially have to have American personnel involved elsewhere. And that's what I see could happen if Putin is allowed to basically do what he wants.
And I understand the argument that you're making. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we have to make sure that we're doing is we're upholding our end of any deals that we have. And, whether it's Poland, Lithuania, France, Germany, whoever, they need to be upholding their end of the deal. And,
That's true. And I do, like I said, I give Trump credit for putting that pressure on them, because it is kind of irritating that they could take the money they should be spending on NATO defense and spend it on, social services for their people. And we're basically subsidizing, healthcare in Finland or something like that. Not Finland, they just recently joined, but, some other NATO country. And
we're also paying pensions for people in Ukraine, many of which don't even live in Ukraine anymore.
Well, but there's also the idea, even on a philosophical level, that the United States has to stand by its word.
Absolutely.
And even though I don't know what our formal agreements are with Taiwan, but we can't let the Chinese just take over Taiwan. Our word is worthless. And I'm very concerned that within the next couple of years, there'll be some very close military action in the Straits of Taiwan. And we may be involved in that as well. But here's the thing. Okay, on the Ukraine, you made your point pretty clear, and that's a valid point, and a lot of people have it. But you differentiate that from your position on Israel. Why?
I think that the biggest thing about Israel and Taiwan are both of those we've had agreements. We have a firm contract in place with how we're going to support them. And I can, like I did last time, I can talk about my personal ties to Israel and why I'm personally pro-Israel. But I don't think that my word, my personal belief, changes the reality that we have an agreement with Israel. And we have to uphold our agreements because, as you were talking about, and as we talked about the last time I was on this show, there's really 2, maybe 3 things that give the U.S. power in the world. And those 3 things are our ability to trade, our military might, and our word. If we do not uphold our word, if our word means nothing, then all of our alliances break apart, because then anyone can back out whenever they feel like they're not getting their end of the deal, because they know we're not going to show up and uphold our end of the bargain. That's why in Israel and in Taiwan, we have to do what we promised we would do. And in Ukraine or anywhere else in the world, we have to make sure if we're going to intervene in any way, shape, or form, our intervention must be part of a previous agreement. Otherwise, there are going to be many more Ukraines around the world who believe that they don't have to give us anything, and we're just going to show up and we're going to save the day. And they don't have to pay anything. In fact, we pay them in order to save them. That's the way the world is going to work if we continue to keep doing this with Ukraine and other countries around the world. So first, there needs to be an agreement, and then we need to uphold that agreement.
Okay, well, on a related issue, there was a bill that was proposed in the Senate that didn't even get a vote in the House. And it included certain issues about the border. But apparently the provisions on the border security were inadequate, or just it was a non-starter in the House. Have you had a chance to look at that bill and why it was such a non-starter?
I've had the opportunity to look at several border bills, and I think the problem with many of these border bills is either they're inadequate or what they're trying to do with certain bills would violate what the administration wants. And so right now we have a House that's fairly well balanced between Democrats and Republicans. Where there's
like 2 votes, right?
Yeah, 2, maybe 3 folks.
Well, there's a vote right now in New York that will fill Mr. Santos's seat.
Yes, for the remainder of the term.
Right.
And that'll be very telling for if Republicans are able to actually get anything done on the border. Now, the problem is they don't want to move a whole lot into the House to be voted on because we have Super Tuesday coming up in 3 weeks, because we have a whole bunch more primary elections coming up in a few weeks. They don't want to have any controversial bills actually being voted on because it could impact primary elections.
Oh, so it's a political reason why this bill didn't go anywhere. Is it the content of the bill itself is what I read to be the objections? Is what was the issues about the bill itself, not the political connections to it, but the bill itself, the content of it, what was that made it so unpopular with a lot of the Republicans?
Well, if we're talking about the same one,
We're
is
talking about several of them. They're all pretty much the same, aren't they? Close to it.
one of them was tying that into a Ukraine funding bill.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Okay.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Then, of course, that was a non-starter with a lot of Republicans because those two things should definitely be separated. We definitely need to be doing something on our southern border. And there have been many other bills proposed that are only border related.
Right. And there's another one, the one that James Langford, Senator Langford, and his bipartisan group put together, and it like is DOA in the House. And a lot of the people were upset with the provisions about the border specifically. And that's I guess a related question. What is it about these bills that the Republicans have such an objection to, because they're placing so much emphasis on border security? They're campaigning on it. That's the number one thing they talk about, other than Joe Biden's condition or whatever else. But the border is the number one issue they're talking about, and they think that's going to be the number one issue that's going to get them, in the Senate and probably in the White House and whatnot. What is it about these bills they object to?
Well, we have to talk a little bit of politics because there's a lot of things in these bills that get slid in there at the last minute, and that's intentional. In many cases, it's intentional to kill the bill. I've been calling Representative Troy Nehls out quite a bit because, as the kids say, he said the quiet part out loud, where Republicans don't want Joe Biden to sign off on a border bill because it gives Joe Biden a win. And so Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House are doing everything they can to put things into the bills so they actually get shut down, so they can say, hey, we were trying to do something,
Right.
but it got shut down.
That was my perception also. And Mr. Trump from the outside was saying, don't vote for this bill. And whether or not he actually had impact upon the Republicans in the public eye, it looked like he did.
Yeah.
And they were doing this primarily for political purposes, not because the bill was inadequate. I heard some people trying to explain the inadequacies of the bill, that it basically, 5,000 would trigger some sort of emergency declaration. Well, 5,000 is still a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, and it really didn't do anything with catch and release, and it really did not do much with the asylum provisions and whatever else. It was a lot of window dressing, is about one put it. But the problem is Trump gets on there and says, don't vote for it. And it looks like that Trump is directing the House Republicans and some of the senators to accommodate his political ambitions more than it is to solve this problem.
And I would agree with that, Brad. I think we have a lot of particularly establishment Republicans who are followers, not leaders, and they would much rather toe whatever party line, whether it's set by Trump or Johnson, or before that McCarthy, or Mitch McConnell in the Senate. They are much more likely to follow whatever the party leadership says than they are to follow their own conscience or to follow the will of the people who elected them. And they know, because the strings of power, including the strings of money to fund their campaigns, endorsements, etc., those come from folks like Donald Trump. They come from folks like Kevin McCarthy. They come from folks like Mitch McConnell. And it makes it very hard, especially when you have primaries right around the corner, in a lot of races that Trump has not made an endorsement in and could make a last-minute endorsement to swing things, or where McConnell, in most cases, you want McConnell out of it. But
you're not a big fan, huh?
I'm not a big fan of McConnell, and the vast majority of the country, I would say, is not really that big of a fan of McConnell, but he does pull the strings of power and of money that could change the course of elections. And so we've got a lot of coward Republicans, coward Democrats too, but in politics is full of cowards who do not want to do what they're elected to do. They would much rather throw their hands up and say, well, party leadership said this. They would much rather listen to party leadership that says, hey, don't do this good thing for America because the person who's going to get credit is someone in the other party. Well, I'm sick and tired of saying, well, that person on the other side is going to get a win, so let's not play the game. What we need to be doing is looking for wins for America, because securing the border, whether it's under Biden or under Trump or whoever else, it would be a win for America. Sure, if we passed it now, Biden would be the one to sign off on it. He'd get a bump in the polls.
Right.
And that is what Republicans are afraid of. That's what Trump is afraid of. And that is why all these coward Republicans, these incumbent cowards, are not willing to actually advance a real border bill that has just border provisions to secure our border, because they don't want Biden to be the one to sign it. They don't want Biden to get the credit. They don't want Biden to get the win. So instead, they would rather America lose than have Biden win.
It's obvious that this is struck a chord with you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
You were pretty worked up there for a minute. So, like, put some water on you, calm down. No, that's good. That's good. You've got such passion. And I've said something similar on this show many times. I've always had a very poor opinion of Congress as a whole for the very reasons you're talking about, because they know how to solve some of these problems, but they'd have to compromise. And now compromise has become a pejorative term, and that's our whole system is built on compromise. The Constitution was written with compromises, but it just compromises now, not trying to work out a solution that's equitable or even beneficial to one side. It's compromises now become, giving up your principles or abandoning your standards or something like that. And I've said that many times. And so I agree with that point. It just, here's the thing. I'm listening to you, and it's obvious you're very passionate about doing the right thing for the country as opposed to right thing for politics. Let's say you're elected, and Mr. Trump puts pressure on you to do something that you don't think is right. What are you going to do?
Well, in that case, I'm going to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an old saying in politics, you dance with the one who brung you. Mm-hmm. And that means when you go off to Washington, D.C., and your constituents want you to vote a certain way, but the big money lobbyists who got you in, or the people who endorsed you to get you in, they want you to vote a different way.
Right.
Who are you going to vote with? You're going to vote with the people who brung you.
You'd like to think so, but is that what's happening here?
That's what happens.
Okay.
But if it's the big money interests that funded your campaign, if it's party leadership that pulled those strings to make sure that you got all the funding you needed and the endorsements lined up for you, then you're going to vote with party leadership. However, if you were more of a grassroots campaign like mine is, when we get in, we're not getting in with the big high dollar donors. We're not getting in with the big party leadership endorsements. We're getting in with the grassroots endorsements. We're getting in because we knocked on doors, and we're representing the will of the people in this district. And so when I go off to Washington, D.C., and someone says, you need to vote this way on a bill, or else we're not going to give you a $5,000 PAC check, I'll say, well, with all due respect, your $5,000 PAC check didn't get me into this race because I didn't take it to begin with, and I will continue to not take PAC money. I have to answer to my savior, and I have to answer to my constituents.
Well, I'm just saying Mr. Trump could put a lot of pressure on you, particularly if you were a rookie member of the Congress. And, and he can call you out, or he could support you. And Trump has such enormous influence in the Republican Party that could be a real deal breaker or deal maker. And I just find it amazing. Is like my problem with Mr. Trump, I got more than one actually, but one of my problems is that he dictates what the Republican Party thinks, it's not the other way around. He thinks that he is the Republican Party, and whatever his policies are or his philosophies are, that's what Republicans should want. But the Republican Party should be built around generally accepted philosophies of governing and conservative philosophies at that. And some of the philosophies, to be frank, are not particularly conservative. But Trump says X, therefore the Republicans think X. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And from what I'm hearing from you now is you somewhat agree with that attitude, that you represent the people, not the ambitions of one man.
Yeah, I get asked all the time who I'm going to be, like, if I support President Trump. I voted for him twice. I'm going to vote for him a third time. When it comes to my role as a representative in the U.S. House, I represent the people. I don't represent the president. And my job is not to idolize one person. And in my campaign, I'm saying, hey, it's not about me. It's about the ideals that this campaign is representing. And if someone else represents these ideals better, then that person should be the representative of this district. It should never be about idolizing one person. And the problem that we have in America is half the people on one side, they'll idolize one guy, and half the people on the other side, they'll idolize the other guy, regardless of whether they're right or wrong. And I think that's leading to even more fracturing in America. Because when we talk about compromise, you should never compromise your values and your principles.
Right. That's not the same thing as working out deals.
Exactly. Now, we used to be in a position as a country where we would look at it and say, look, Brad, you and I, we fundamentally agree that we want what's best for this country. We fundamentally agree on some of the basic things that constitute what that is. We just have a different way of getting there. And so let's sit down and let's talk out, okay, here's your plan, here's my plan, here's where they intersect, and we can agree on this, here's where they don't, and we might have to battle it out a little bit and, see which way ultimately is better to reaching our end goal. We used to be able to do that because we were able to look at our principles first and then look at the goals that we have for this country, instead of there is one person on this side who speaks for party X and one person on that side who speaks for party Y, and one of those, he doesn't even know what he's saying. We cannot continue to have this blind following at any level. And that's one of the reasons why we've been very, very active in this district, having 94 public events since I announced, and many more still to go, is so that we can have dialogue. And we can start, Brad, you and I, and say, this is what we believe in. These are our core principles. This is where we want America to go. How do we get there? And we don't get there by saying the only way there is if Kevin McCarthy leads the way, or if Chuck Schumer leads the way, or anyone else for that matter.
Chuck Schumer, that's a frightening thought. But
It's frightening to me.
Well, say yes. And so you are really one of the few that I hear speaking like this, because I see a lot of other candidates across the country, not just here in Texas, but all, wearing Trump stickers and hats and everything. They could associate themselves with Donald Trump for various reasons, for his endorsement, for his good graces, or to stay out of his bad graces. Because I remember, I was astounded back in the Iowa primaries when Chip Roy was supporting DeSantis, and Trump calls Chip Roy a rhino. Are you kidding me? Are you Chip Roy? If you don't, vast listening audience, if you don't know who Chip Roy is, he is a member of the House that is in no way a rhino.
He has a 100% liberty score.
Right. But see, that's what happens. You go against Donald Trump by supporting DeSantis or not voting on the bill the way he wants or whatever else. He risks calling you all these names on Twitter, and he has such a devoted following. That could be a real backbreaker on a campaign.
Or it could be very freeing, where if party leadership is working against you, then that allows you the freedom to actually represent your constituents and say, hey, wait a second. My constituents don't believe everything coming out of party leadership. My constituents and constituents across the country, they're looking for someone who actually represents their interests rather than the Republican Party leadership's interests. Speaking
of which, at the local level, has the Republican Party leadership been either supportive or neutral or oppositional?
It's been a mix. I mean, there are 13 counties in this district. I mean, we were running into some issues with the local Johnson County Republican Party, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yes.
All right.
No, but I guess we should, for the listening audience, to be more clear what I was saying. They are very controlling about your positions and what they expect from you. And if you deviate from that, they can be kind of difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Also, if you run against the establishment's going to fight back.
Right.
And mind you, I've been involved with the Johnson County Republican Volunteers for a while. I've been on committees. I've knocked doors for conservative candidates. But as soon as you put yourself out there and you say, hey, what we have right now is not good enough, then there are going to be certain factions of the party who will use their influence to make sure that you don't get speaking engagements, use their influence to make sure to spread lies about you on social media, using official social media channels of the local Republican Party. And what we really have in Johnson County is I'm going to get in so much trouble for this, but that's fine.
Well, you're a bomb thrower anyway. Get after it.
I guess so. Is we have several layers of the Republican Party. We've got the more establishment Republicans, and then we also have the grassroots activists, those who actually knock on doors, those who actually do work here in Johnson County, and the same thing going on in Tarrant County. The thing is, as soon as you run against an incumbent, you've alienated that echelon of folks who are in the establishment. They like the establishment guy because they like the way the power structure is. Versus the grassroots, they're sick and tired of politicians going off to Austin and to Washington, D.C., who promise them one thing and then do another, or just get up there and do absolutely nothing, get nothing done. And so we have a lot of those folks in support of us. However, we were running into issues with folks down in the Johnson County Republican Party who were pushing back against us, using official social media to spread lies about us. We got a lot of that taken care of with some internal fighting between the grassroots activists and the establishment members of the party. And, you know, we even had someone who was very well known in the Johnson County Republican Party call up my campaign manager and try to poach him from my campaign. To which my campaign manager said, look, it's not about the money. I mean, we're all, my entire staff, self included, we're working for free because we believe in this. You know, I want to give a shout out to my campaign manager, Sean, who's done an incredible job working 60 plus hours a week for zero pay because we just don't have the money in our coffers. Right. But what we are able to do is to spread that enthusiasm around the district and actually get stuff done. There's a reason we've been able to put on or be in attendance at 94 public events already, because we have such dedicated volunteers and people knocking doors for us in all 13 counties of this district. And that's something the incumbent doesn't have. That's something that the establishment folks, they're not willing to do. And just going out and running a campaign, you're going to step on some toes, especially if it's not an open seat.
Well, yesterday I had Dwayne Burns on, and he's seeing, even though he's an incumbent and you think he's establishment, he's actually kind of almost running a campaign like you're having to run because of the oil money coming in and supporting a lot of these Texas House and Senate primaries in the state level. Of course, you know, we all know the funding is different and the rules are different and whatever else, and he's just getting swamped. I mean, and so he's kind of in the same position you are, and because he has alienated some of the leadership of the Republican Party of this state because of voucher votes and whatever else. And my point with all of that is that you know, Ronald Reagan had the big tent philosophy that we're going to be able to, within the Republican Party, as long as we agree on certain things, we may have disagreements and whatever else, but we're not going to become a party that dictatorially tells you what you're going to believe if you want to be a Republican, and that's it. I mean, there is a point that if you go too far outside the tent, you're not going to be part of it anymore. But you had room within the Republican Party to have some differentiation, but I don't see that anymore. To me, it's like, particularly at the state level, it's Paxton, Patrick, Abbott, and at the national level, it's Trump and Johnson and Ted Cruz maybe. And it's like, and if you deviate from that at all, you can't call yourself a Republican anymore. And that's not right. I mean, I've voted Republican all my life, but it's making it really hard sometimes because some of the things that they support, I don't. Some of the things I want them to support, they don't. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to said that both Democrats and Republicans, or at least people that call themselves as such, feel like they don't have anybody to vote for anymore.
Yeah, and that's something that we've gotten all over the district. And, you know, when we knock on doors, we have people who said, well, I wasn't going to vote this election, but you came to my door, we talked, we had a good conversation. We actually align on 90% of the stuff we talk about.
But we focused on the 10%, and that's the wrong thing.
Yeah. See, one thing that we've realized is that the Republican Party is a dying party. We have a smaller and smaller group of people who are allowed to run for office. We have a smaller and smaller group of people that will be allowed to be endorsed. I mean, we've got a lot of people who want to support our campaign but are afraid of the backlash. We have people who are close childhood friends of my opponent who are telling their friends to vote for me and are going out and going to vote for me, but they can't write a check to help support the campaign because that is a line too far and they're going to hear it. And they might be alienated from the Republican Party. That is not the way the Republican Party should be. The Republican Party should be the party of free ideas, free expression, the party of the First Amendment, as well as the party of the Second, the party of the Fourth, the Fifth, the 10th. We need to be a party that embraces a different set of ideas. We can talk about who's more conservative than who. I mean, my platform and my record is certainly, in my opinion, more conservative than the incumbent. And we can talk about that. But we should be able to at least talk about that instead of trying to run people off from the party. Because what happens is, especially if you're someone young in this party, and I'm fairly young. I'm the youngest congressional candidate in America.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I figured you'd be among them. Yes.
But this is not just coming from my experience. This is coming from the experiences of a lot of younger folks who are coming to our campaign who've told me, look, I'm never going to vote. In their words, they're never going to vote for another Republican again or be involved in the Republican Party if this is the way that the party treats people who don't think 100% like them.
Right. I'm not active politically other than what I do here or teach. I teach government classes, as you know. But as far as like being part of the Republican Party processes and whatever else, I don't get involved with that because I know that I'd be considered a heretic on certain things. All right. And, and it's unfortunate because, like you said, 90%, we're pretty much on the same thing, but we become such a party personality and restriction of thought. And you could say the same thing about Democrats. I mean, there's no such thing as a pro-life Democrat anymore. There used to be, but, there's no such thing anymore as a strong on defense Democrat. There used to be. But it just now we're so rigid in our lanes that, it's, the idea of being a moderate of any kind is just roadkill,
What we need to get back to is in the Republican Party, whether it's pro-life legislation. I mean, that is something where you can slice up the different ideologies and the different proposals 1,000 different ways, and everyone's going to be advocating for something slightly different. But 90% of that is the same. So what if we went in there and we enacted the 90% that we can all agree on and then fought over the 10?
Well,
instead of fighting over the 10 and neglecting the 90%.
There's people with a vested interest to fight over the 10, lobby groups and interest groups that use it for fundraising, and all this other business. But I would like to segue into the pro-life argument because obviously as you wear your wristband and it's a very important issue to you, I know. I haven't heard this much lately, but the 15-week national ban, okay, how do you square that with states' rights? Because, in Texas, that would actually liberalize abortion laws. In California, greatly restrict them. And can you find a way to support a nationwide ban, or do you? I don't know. Do you? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I do. It's on my website. It's on my platform. One thing that I will be introducing in my first term is a nationwide ban on abortion.
How many weeks, if any?
I would like to see a 6-week or even earlier ban on abortion.
How do you square that, though, with your very strong position on the 10th Amendment?
Yeah, that's a great question and one that I've gotten quite a bit lately. Now, I'm a big believer in the Constitution as it is written. I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment that says anything not in the Constitution is up to the states and to the people. Now, in order to access any of the other rights in the Constitution, one must first be alive. Therefore, it is a federal responsibility to protect life in this country. I'm of the belief that it shouldn't matter whether you would have been born in Texas, down the road in Fort Worth like I was, or whether you would have been born in Illinois. Your life has the same infinite value in the eyes of our Creator and deserves to be protected. It should not be at the political whims of what the folks down in Austin think or the folks up in Illinois think. Your life should not depend on whether other people think it has value or not.
Now, you said you would put it at 6 weeks. What if the only way you can get it done is at 15?
If we can agree on 15, if we can agree on 15, we'll agree on 15, and then we'll argue to bring it earlier. But I'm in favor of imposing a nationwide ban on abortion. If it's at 15 weeks, then fine, we'll do 15 and then argue over the rest.
So you're not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Personally, I would be very, very disappointed and a little heartbroken if we were not able to save the lives of children earlier on. But I am not going to say, well, because we can't save 100%, we won't save any.
Okay. How about exceptions? I mean, we had a big case here in Texas, as you know, about a woman who wanted to get an abortion because the child was going to be stillborn, I believe. Kate Cox was her name. Would you have exceptions for those kind of situations or rape situations or things like that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about things like rape and incest, those are less than 1%.
Right.
Of all the
it's a
cases.
very...
And that's another case where folks on both sides of the aisle, they'll let that 1% or less dictate what happens in 100% of cases. And so I don't think that conversation there is entirely productive. I think that the conversation that we should be having is a good question that you asked, is about, what about in the case of the life of the mother? Well, I believe, and my governing philosophy is this, that the role of the federal government is to protect our rights and our rights and to adjudicate when they come into conflict with one another. Our primary right is the right to live. And if two individuals' primary rights come into conflict with another, they both have the right to live and they both have the right to defend their life up to and including taking the life of another individual. So it's the same thing. If someone pulls a gun on you, you have the right to take their life to defend your own. And in the situation where a mother's life is at risk, then I would be okay with there being an exception for that.
Well, you're right about the 1% is really just dictating this whole conversation because, I've talked to people on this issue, and majority of the people I know said, look, I hate it for that 1%, but I'd rather save 99 than save none because we held out for the 1%. But they understand, the compromise they're making.
Yeah.
But some of I've had a couple others that are like, no, it's either all or nothing. And so what we got in a lot of cases is nothing. And I just, that kind of thinking is reason why this abortion issue has been so prevalent. The only other issue in our history I think has been so divisive is slavery and whatnot. But as far as would I, sitting in that seat in Congress, if I had a bill that would save the vast majority of lives, but I would not get 100%, I would vote for the bill to save what I could, as opposed to holding out for the entire thing. And I will, if I have to answer to my maker for that, then that's on me, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so that's that. I know, but as far as that issue, I think it's unfortunate and being, politically correct, is that the Democrats are placing so much emphasis on the election on that issue. It's just, it's a very uncomfortable issue for me personally because I know what's happening in an abortion, and they want to base their whole party around that. That's concerning to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're running close on time, but they did mention something earlier in our conversation about trade. Republicans have always stood for free trade. Not anymore. All right, what's your position on that?
Well, I would say that Republicans have not always stood for free trade. Even Reagan was not a free trader. He was a fair trader.
Right, but he would, if you were trading fairly with us, we'd trade fairly with y'all.
Absolutely.
But if y'all were putting sanctions and all this other stuff on us, okay, we'd retaliate. And that's always been the policy. That's not what I'm talking about. We have adopted in a lot of cases an old Democratic philosophy of high tariffs. Mr. Trump brought tariffs in. He wants to bring tariffs. And Mr. Biden, despite all his hair pulling about it, still kept the tariffs.
Yeah.
And Trump wants to keep the tariffs. But traditionally, fair trade, free trade, however you want to phrase it, has been a Republican policy. Now it's not. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that all of our trade agreements should be America first. We should be serving our own citizens first. Now, there are certain things where we could go into Central America because we can't really grow bananas here.
Right.
But we can work with Central American companies for them to grow bananas and whatever else in the produce world and import that here in exchange for something that they want that we manufacture here. The problem that we've had over the last 50 or 60 years is globalization has meant the loss of jobs around the world. And that's natural when you have a globalized economy. But when you talk to someone who lost their job because the federal government decided, let's open this up and allow cars to be manufactured on the other side of the world and then brought to the U.S. for cheaper. Well, that's a whole bunch of people in Detroit out of a job.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people in Texas that can afford a car more easily.
That's true. And so you have to balance the two of those. And you ultimately have to make the decision of what is going to be best for your constituency, America, rather than what's going to be best for the world as a whole, because those two things may not always line up. In fact, oftentimes they don't. And I would much rather an administration and a Congress that looks at American interests first, because we represent America, than global interests.
Well, it just, I'm not a big fan of Walmart for a lot of reasons, but, a lot of people shop there because that's what they can afford. And if we put tariffs up all over it, it's going to make it harder on that segment of our society to purchase basic stuff.
Oh, I understand. The little microwave meals from Michelina's, they used to be $1. Now they're $1.25. They went up to $1.08, then $1.25. And I know this sort of thing because occasionally, back when I was living in my car for 2 years while I was trying to build up my company, I would get myself a treat, a $1 microwave meal. And so when that stuff started coming up, I felt it. And I understand how much that cuts into, your bottom line. And so we have to have this balance of how do we keep grocery prices down? How do we keep gas prices down in a way that is an America first policy, a constituent first policy, rather than this would make a good trade deal with someone else, halfway around the world.
Well, there is something I want to bring up, though. You're not just looking at it globally. You have an aversion to higher taxes or any kind of taxes, really unnecessary taxes, even at the local level. And
yes,
one of my listeners asked about a meeting you attended at the city council on September 23rd, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a picture of it, but I don't know if you want to, Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Yeah. But you don't live in Burleson, so why were you protesting taxes in a city you're not living in?
No, I had a handful of folks from Burleson. I've got lots of connections to the city of Burleson.
Okay.
And I have an aversion to really an injustice anywhere. An injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. I don't believe that folks should be taxed out of their homes. And so when I got a call from a couple of folks who asked me if I would come speak at this the city council meeting, I said, well, absolutely. Because a handful of the people up there, including Mayor Fletcher, he ran on the fact that they had just reduced taxes by 7%. They reduced the tax rate by 7%. Got elected, and then I believe this was 3 or 4 months after the new term started, and they were increasing the tax rate by 9%. And that's something that I had a problem with. In an era where people are already getting taxed out of their homes, they were looking at adding an additional $100 annually, which doesn't sound like a lot to some people, but to people living paycheck to paycheck, taking another $100 out of our pockets in order to pay for their pet projects in many cases is unacceptable.
Victoria Johnson's going to be on, and Dan McClendon's going to be on next week. I'm going to ask them about this, and what their perspective is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because honestly, I don't remember them voting a tax increase that day. But maybe,
So they were voting to approve the budget that included the new tax increase.
I'll ask them about it, but I just wanted to get your response to that because, it's obvious that taxes are a big deal if you're going to go protest taxes in another community.
Yeah, absolutely. And
have you done that before in other communities?
Yeah, I've done that in a handful of communities. I've gone out when people in Godley and Joshua have asked me to come out and speak against the bond proposals, and in Granbury as well. These are issues that matter to me. They might be local issues, but I'm not above local issues.
No. I just the person that asked me to ask about this thought it was odd that somebody who lives in Arlington was protesting Burleson taxes, but you explained it, so there you go.
One thing that I'll say in general, whether it's Burleson or anywhere else, is I'm sick and tired of governments, whether it's city council or whether it's the federal government, deciding that they know what's best for our lives and that they can just reach into our pockets as much as they want because they get to write the bills, they get to write the budgets, and they start treating our property like it's theirs, our pocketbooks and our wallets like they're just these endless resources for them to pull from. And if we don't take a stand at the local level, then they will continue to do that. If we don't take a stand at the national level, then they'll continue to pull more and more money out of our pockets with their greedy little fingers.
Well, if, God forbid, I don't want to wish ill, but let's say March 5th doesn't go the way you want. Do you have plans to do this again, either at state or national level?
I will definitely remain involved. I mean, the first thing I'll do is I'll take a little vacation with my wife, and if I may, because Valentine's Day is tomorrow.
You betcha.
Jen, my wife's name is Jen Lucci. Will you be my Valentine?
Take her to the homecoming dance.
Yeah, take her out. We'll go somewhere nice, and then after that, we will be knocking on doors for other conservative candidates in our community and around the country.
Well, I can't imagine doing this job without a supportive wife.
She's amazing.
Yes. Well, I'm not wishing you, bad luck or anything like that, but there is that possibility, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if maybe you would turn your attention maybe to state level politics or Arlington level politics, or maybe try again in District 25 2 years from now.
All of that remains to be seen. The one thing that I can tell you is we will remain involved. We will remain fighting for conservative priorities and for conservative policies at all levels.
Well, regardless of what happens on March 5th, I'd like to have you back on the show, which maybe, you could talk about it as a candidate or you can talk about it as a commentator or whatever else. I think, these are very productive conversations. So maybe sometime in later spring,
okay,
you can do this again, even win, lose, or draw next primary day. But because I think these are good conversations to have that people don't really get to hear a lot. It's so dominated by people with very firm opinions, shall we say, and they don't leave much room for conversation and debate. The floor is yours. You have the last few minutes. You can look in the camera. You can use it for a clip on your campaign if you wish on your social media. So speak to the public.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Well, I think the biggest thing that we have to say is look at what's happened over the last 12 years. Do we like where this country is going? Do we like where it's headed? Or do we want something new? Do we want to continue to elect the same folks at all levels, including in this race where we've had the same guy in office for 12 years who's only ever passed one bill into law, that was renaming a post office a decade ago? Or do we want to go in a new direction, someone who will fight for the district rather than party leadership? That's the choice that we have right now. And I would urge everyone who's listening to go vote February 20th through March 1st. That's early voting. You can vote anywhere in the county, or on Election Day, March 5th. I would appreciate your vote. My name is Matthew Lucci. It is time to take our country back from the D.C. establishment, and I would appreciate your vote.
Well,
God bless.
You said it better than I could. So anyway, the best of luck to you. Like I said, or you said, actually, next Tuesday is early voting.
Yep.
And guys, this is one of the duties of being a citizen. It's a right and it's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And so you go out there and vote, and then we'll be doing this again in November. I'll be seeing Mr. Lucci again on the show at some future date pretty soon, I'm sure. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the candor and the willingness to state your mind free and unfettered. So there you go.
I appreciate you, Brad.
Right.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Taylor. We'll see. On Thursday, I have Randy Woolsey of the Burleson CTE program. We talk about all those various programs. And next week, like I mentioned, Victoria Johnson and Dan McClendon will be on. So we have a very packed few weeks coming up. So we'll see you then.